Thank you very much, Owen. Good afternoon. I am praying in the background my dog doesn't start barking. So I know this is about dealing with different personalities. Sometimes animals can be as challenging as humans as well. So hopefully he'll stay quiet under the desk. So we're talking about dealing with different personalities at work. And we advertise this webinar as dealing with difficult personalities at work, but it's actually the same thing. And in my view, I've spent a lot of years studying personalities and work behavior and things like that in the area that I'm working in. And a lot of people come to me and say, look, Fiona, I'm dealing with somebody who is very difficult at work. And the main point before we start the webinar is to say, there's actually no such thing as a difficult personality. It's a different personality. The reason we have difficulties with people is because they're different. And every single thing comes down to how different our personalities are. And that's why we get on with people naturally and not get on with other people, which is totally fine in the context of work and personal lives. So it's all about respecting the differences and being aware of your own personality so that we can adapt and tweak it when we need to. So Owen, there's just a little bit of background noise, I think might be on somebody's side there.
Okay, I'll come mute
yourself. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to just start with a couple of the first slides. And I love this slide because it represents people that are very happy and people that can be very negative in work. And this is all about mindset. And mindset actually wraps around personality because people are either positive or negative. And you all know people that are either glass half full or glass half empty. And this can underpin everything about personalities, whether you come to work with a positive attitude or where you come to work with a negative attitude. And a lot of people refer to this negative attitude as toxic or toxicity in people that they work with, and they find it very, very difficult to work with them then. So that's not actually personality, it's just something in terms of mindset and attitude that people have. If people have more of a growth mindset in work, they're not afraid of taking risks, they love challenging themselves, they love challenging their teams, they're much growth focused and very positive focused. Those with that negative mindset are very trapped in a negative state. They can't be coached by people because they're very negative. They can't see outside the circle of concern that they're stuck in. And sometimes people feel that they have a difficult personality as a result of that, but it's not necessarily down to their personality, it's actually just their mindset. So the theory behind personality type is that we are born with, live with, and die with our type. By the time a child is 2 years of age, you can very clearly see what type of personality they have. And it's quite obvious from the introvert to extrovert spectrum, you can see where they lie in terms of that. We don't change as children. We then were brought into the workplace and we're just adults and we have exactly the same wants and needs in terms of our personality type. For example, extroverts, as a child, an extrovert will love variety of things and they'll get bored quite easily, and adults are exactly the same. So sometimes people see extrovert and introvert as a difficulty when they're trying to get on with people, because some people like variety and some people like a depth of interests, and that's the difference between extroverts and introverts. So the theory behind, again, personality type is that we're born with, live with, and die with our type. We cannot change who we are, but what we can do is adapt and flex into other elements of our personality temporarily to get the best out of a situation. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this shortly. So hold on to that. We don't have to change who we are, but we can just temporarily flex for a meeting or for a day or for a situation to go into another zone of our personality that's normally quite alien to us. And that's why I have our little friend up here in the screen, because it's all about adapting yourself so you can do this. So sorry, there's still a little bit of background noise on the other side. If someone could mute there, please. So we have to look inward, first of all, when we're looking at personalities. There is no way we can understand anybody else until we start looking inward. We can only do that through feedback from other people, personality tests, and awareness sessions, coaching, mentoring, all those different kind of elements in organizations really allow us to look inward and go, who are we? And we might have one perception of what we are, but actually what we are is very different from what others see we are. So I might think I'm a great listener, and I know that's a weakness that I have. So I might say I'm a great listener, but everyone else knows around me that I'm not a good listener. So you have to look and really inward and see, who are you, what kind of personality you have, so then you can relate better to other people. I love this African proverb: when there's no enemy within, the enemies outside can do you no harm. And this is so true. So what that means is if you've truly looked at yourself, done a lot of self-awareness, personality testing and feedback, like I just mentioned, there is no enemy within, you know yourself, then nobody outside can do you harm. However, if you don't spend time really focusing on who you are, everyone outside is an enemy, because you don't know your strengths and you don't know your weaknesses. And for every strength that you have with your personality, there's always a corresponding blind spot or shadow that you have to work with too. For example, extroverts, like I am myself, our blind spot is that we don't listen enough sometimes. And that can cause a difficulty with working with people, because they might think that we're being difficult when we're not. It's just our personality. So I'm going to look at the MBTI, and some people may have used this as a personality test before. The MBTI stands for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it's the oldest standing personality preference questionnaire tool that's out there. And there's other ones like Insights, DISC, and all those as well, which are just as good. But this one is a personal favorite of mine because it looks at behaviors. So I'm going to explain this grid in front of you. And there's 4 preferences with the Myers-Briggs personality tool. And this is the best way of describing the difficult personalities element. The first strand is extrovert and introvert. And like any kind of spectrum, there's extremes, or you can lie in the middle with this. This is all about where you get your source of energy. So as you said, extroverts love speaking, and they tend to speak before they think. They love getting their energy from people. They're very, bouncy and full of energy by nature, and love being around by people. Introverts are very, more reserved and like to reflect that little bit longer. So where you can see how there could be a difficult personality or a different situation here is sometimes extroverts will push introverts for an answer on something. So if you're around a table at a meeting and there's an introvert reflecting and thinking things through in a meeting, an extrovert will be the first person to corner that person and say, "You've been very quiet. Can we have your view?" Or "What do you think?" That's the worst thing you can do to an introverted personality, and they won't thank you for that. So that's already one source of where you can see why someone might perceive another personality as difficult. And introverts might perceive extroverts as too loud sometimes, that they can be quite dominant or overbearing because they're such full of energy and so talkative. And on the flip side, extroverts might perceive, again, introverts as too quiet sometimes, and too reflective and too slow in their decision-making processes. And that's sometimes stereotypes that go along with that. That's only one strand of personality, so we have 3 more to go. So already you can see where there's difficulties in that first one. The second one is all about how we gather information. And a sensing type of person will always look at what's right in front of them. In a meeting context, there often the people will say, "Can we just go back to reality here and look at the facts? You're away in the fairies there up in the clouds. Can we just come back to reality here?" And there's a lot of those type of people in work. On the flip side of that personality is the intuition type of people, who are all very futuristic, who are very creative and innovative and love living in the future, and say, "Look, if we do this change in work now, in a year's time, we're going to look like this." That's a huge cause of conflict in the workplace, because those people are coming from a very different thought process and how they gather information. So if you layer that on top of extrovert and introvert, that's another layer of complexities that people deal with. The third one then is all about the head versus the heart. So in any situation when you've got to make a decision, you will either think with a logical brain or you'll feel with the heart through relationship and passion and emotion focus. So if you're making decisions on a feeling side, that's what you're going to be guided by. So anyone working in a team context, some people will be led by the heart, some will be led by the head. Again, another cause of difficulty and another cause of why people might have, difficult conversations with other people, because one is leading from the heart, one is leading from the head. Now, that's not to say feeling people can't think and thinking people can't feel. It just means that's your gut reaction to a situation. Now, the last one is the largest source of conflict and the largest source of dealing with difficult people in the workplace. And this is all about how you relate to the external world. So let me give you some examples on this. J is for judging. And it doesn't mean judging in the traditional context that we mean, but judgment is all about being very extremely structured in your work. So if you've got a deadline on, say, Friday by close of business, you're going to submit your stuff by Thursday close of business, because you're very, very organized and always do things well in advance. If you're studying, say, for a master's or a diploma outside of work, again, you'll have all of your stuff submitted well in advance. There's A and B, and that's where you go. Perception on the other side is all about people that are very spontaneous and love spontaneity, highly adaptable to change, go with the flow type of people, and they thrive on submitting things 5 minutes before deadline. These are the kind of people that go and do their weekly food shop, make no food lists, just go with their supermarket trolley and add in all sorts of things and then come home. Where the judging people will have their supermarket list. Often the food is in by aisle of order, and everything is so methodically structured. So that's the difference in terms of how you structure your day. Again, this is the biggest source of conflict. And if you are a manager, you're more of a J-type structured personality, you're much more prone to being a micromanager because you like control, you don't like to relinquish control and give autonomy, and sometimes you will have issues with trusting other people to actually do the work to the standard that you'd expect for yourself. So you'd be very conscientious in terms of this strand. Spontaneous people can be very difficult to manage sometimes because they just like to do things in their own way. There's absolutely no difference in performance here. A J and a P type person will perform just as well. It's how they do it. So again, this is the biggest source of conflict in organizations, and when you have disagreements in work, this can often come down to it. So we've got 4 strands here, which, and I'm going to show you what I am, just to give you an example. I'm an extrovert, I'm intuition, which is bigger thinking. I'm more on the feeling side with decisions, and I'm very, very structured. So that gives you a snapshot of a profile to give you what a flavor would look like. And in my case, I've often found it very difficult dealing with people that would be on the opposite spectrum from me, or actually being the same as me, because we're too alike. So there's lots of kind of things that can work with this. An example would be I was dealing with a stakeholder once recently, and I came across to this person as quite demanding and quite pushy because of my extroversion, which means I'm very outspoken, can be perceived as dominant. But because of the judgment part of my personality, I wanted things yesterday. So if you put the combination of extroversion, feeling, which means I'm passionate about it, and the judging, I might come across to someone as demanding and pushy. And that's why in work, we have these differences all the time with people, and it's purely down to personality. There's no malice behind these things. It's just we are wired differently. I mentioned about the introvert extrovert also, and it's worthwhile to note that 2/3 of the population are what we call ambiverts. And there's not much kind of theory written about this, and it's a huge portion of our workforce because often people feel they don't fit on either an introvert or an extrovert side of the spectrum, and that's because they're a bit of both. And it's known as the personality that's the best of both worlds because they get on with everybody. However, the blind spot or perception from the negative side of being an ambivert is that sometimes people will perceive these people as moody because one day they're all up for the fun and the crack in the office, and then the next day they like to retreat and recharge their batteries like an introvert would do. So sometimes people perceive them as moody or hot and cold, and that's where that comes from as well. So just so you know. So there's the 16 types that we can actually have in personalities. It just goes to show how big a variety there is of people. And I just put my little one down there just to give you an example of what one looks like. So as you mentioned, there's a shadow with every blind spot. So there's no such thing as a top class personality or the best personality. They're all personalities, they're all qualities, there's all strengths, there's all weaknesses in every one. But really to know yourself, you got to look at your strengths, but this shadow, which is your blind spot or a potential blind spot. And what I ask people to often do is SWOT analysis yourself. We use SWOT analysis in all sorts of business and marketing terms every single day. But actually, if you do a SWOT analysis on yourself, you get to kind of a quick open the door of yourself to see what are your strengths in your personality? What are your weaknesses, which is all internal stuff? And then what are the opportunities and threats that may come externally from people? So it's often worth just, taking a blank piece of paper out if you don't have the time to do a personality test and really jot down where your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats are. This can really help you if you're relating to different people or shall we say difficult people in the workplace, because we're actually putting themselves in their shoes. The negative outcomes of not paying attention to your own personality differences to others ultimately is poor relationships at work. And it deals to a lot of conflict. It deals to a lot of what we call personality clashes, derailed projects, and in some cases turnover, especially if the personality clashes with your superior. The positive outcomes, if you actually stop and look at your own personality and take into account those of others, is creativity. That's where we get ideas from. And all too often in organizations, the same type of people hire the same type of people. And it's what we refer to as similar to me bias. And if you're actually working with all the same people, you don't really get beyond where you're supposed to be because you all have the same thinking process. So if we actually recognize that it's okay to work with people with different personalities, even if they're challenging, even if they're difficult, because we'll have much more creativity. In the long run, we will have enhanced relationships. There'll be a lot more fruitful diversity in the organization. And, you know, a lot of research says that productivity does increase if you've got a diversity of personalities in the workplace. And team dynamics usually do flourish. So there's a cheesy little picture of me, given I'm an extrovert, I have to put myself out there in terms of some takeaway tips here for this. So you have to start with awareness, as I said, assessments or training or really looking inward, doing some coaching, focusing on your strengths and weaknesses and tackling those weaknesses that you know that have been there for a long time, but you choose to close the door on them. Senior leaders, in my view, are in two categories. The senior leaders in companies, number one, would be that it's my way or the highway, and this is how I am, and I've been very successful in my own right. I'm not going to change who I am for other people. It's their problem. That's a mindset. Senior leaders in the other side of business will say, you know what? I can always change. I can always be a better version of myself. I can reflect. I can adapt for other people to make the best of the situation. And that's what I'm urging people to go into, is that second type of organization, to say it is okay to temporarily adapt. It is okay to temporarily change and challenge yourself with those difficult people that you find in the workplace. Go for that cup of coffee with that person. Try and see beyond their personality and see that they're actually just an okay person underneath it all. It's just buried with all sorts of things. And bear in mind, we've got personality. We also might have a different culture on top of it. There might also be a whole host of legacy issues in the organization. The person might be going through a very difficult time personally. There's so many other variables and contextual factors that can impact on this as well. Second tip, again, is knowing both your own and your other personality type preferences. So do you have a preference to feel before thinking? Do you have a preference to talk rather than listen? So being truly aware of that helps. Adapt and encourage others to adapt. And for those that are on this webinar that are leading teams, you know, role modeling is a prime example here. You are the role model. You're telling them that we need to actually, you know, take stock of other people's way of doing things and recognizing that it might be done differently to the way you normally do it, but that's okay. Reading body language more closely is really important if you're working face-to-face with certain people, because the body language tells you absolutely everything before the mouth even engages. So being, you know, more reflective on that, and those that are quite emotionally intelligent will be able to connect and resonate in with other people's emotions quite quickly. So if you have emotional intelligence, use it. And if you don't have emotional intelligence, the great thing is that's something that you can work on, because it's nothing to do with personality. It's quite a separate behavior that we can work towards. The fifth area would be develop your blind spots. So for example, one of my weaknesses that I've had to work on over the years is being a little bit more patient with people and, you know, focusing on listening that little bit more. And that's my blind spot. I'm aware of it, but I need to continually work on it because it is one of my blind spots. That actually helps me with relationships that I sometimes have a challenge with. Encourage diversity and respect differences, and be seen to promote this as well. So that is the end of the webinar today. We're going to look at some questions now, and I just have an advertisement here up from the ICBE on the wellbeing event also in November, if anyone is interested to go. So I know we have one question that I'm going to answer straight away, and then Owen, you might be as kind to possibly share more.
Two more after that, yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so the first question came from somebody who's looking in terms of a remote context or virtual working, where people might be, you know, not working beside you and they're having a difficult personality. So I actually used to work in a 100% virtual organization, and I used to do all my business by a phone and by email and webinars and things like that. So I get the difficulties that can happen. The whole thing that underpins remote relationships is trust. And if you don't have trust in the organization, obviously the individuals won't trust either. And there's a concept we use in virtual working called swift trust. And what that means is it's actually temporary trust that you extend to people that you've never met. They say in theory that you have to meet a person once for it to actually sustain a business relationship remotely. If you haven't met the person, it's extremely difficult to build and maintain a relationship because you've never sat down and had that face-to-face contact. There's a lot of remote organizations out there now where this is the way we work, but we do need to see if we can actually meet that person once to help that relationship. In terms of some tips in dealing with somebody difficult, I would go back to the trust thing, because trust and fear and confidence are the three things that trigger difficult situations between people, and that's where we need to focus on. So is there trust there? That's the first thing. Is the person afraid of something? And could it be down to something like, you know, they're more of the kind of P-type personality where they like to go with the flow a little bit more, and you might be more a J-type personality and you're putting pressure on them to give you updates when really there's no essential need for updates. So my advice is look at the relationship, take a step back, look at your personality type and have a think about what you think the other person's personality type might be. Then there might be somewhere you can meet in the middle. But often these things can be just done by having an informal conversation just to say, look, I want to be able to work better with you. What's the best approach? And leave it open-ended. But I could talk all day about this because it's quite a complex issue. So I'll go on to the next question if that's okay, Owen.
So the next one was just a recommendation of general reading, either books or there might be even some podcasts or some online people that you would recommend.
Yeah, I can send you a list, Owen, and you can send it along with the presentation then.
Okay, great. And then just final one, at what point should you consider using a mediator?
Yeah.
Or should you use a mediator in dealing with difficult people if it's causing a lot of discomfort and you're finding it very difficult? Should you use a mediator, and at what point should that?
Absolutely. I mean, mediation is great, but it should be more of a last resort alternative because I think there's a lot you can do yourself. Mediators are great at coming in as an independent party if the two people just can't sit down and talk. I think if there is a case where you still can sit down and talk, or possibly use somebody else in the workplace to get in with you and have that conversation between the three of you, I would try and utilize that first if at all possible. Mediators have great results, of course, so don't get me wrong, but I would use it as a secondary measure. Often if it's very emotive and there's a lot of emotional issues at play, or there's quite a legacy between the two of you where there's a lot of layers and you're not actually sure what is the source of the issue, then definitely mediator can help. If it's something that's more recent and you think you can actually sit down, I would try and tackle it yourself first, because sometimes when you bring in a third party, it can actually make it a little bit more formal, which sometimes is needed. I suppose it's hard to kind of advise when it's such a general case, but I would always try and do the step first if possible yourself.
Great. Okay, are there any more questions from the group? If they are, please drop them into chat. And in the meanwhile, just the event that's coming up on Thursday the 29th for the Wellbeing event. If people are interested, please come back to the ICBE on it. Okay, there's no more questions. Fiona, thank you very much. I think a lot from that understanding of personality types really does help, and it's very obvious in terms of what you should be looking at. And then just keeping an open communication channel. We have recorded today's session, which we shall share later on. And if anyone else has any questions that arise after session, please send them on to us. But Fiona, thank you very much.
You're most welcome. It's very hard.
Thank you everyone who joined us today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye. Okay, bye.